So good morning, everybody, and welcome to the second day of the Peer Learning and Exchange event on strengthening climate budgeting reforms, transparency and accountability. We've had a great first day, and just giving us a quick recap, I'm going to introduce my colleague, Excellent Hachileka, who will quickly give us a recap of the first day. Excellent.
Good morning, everyone. I'm happy to be here again, the second day of this very exciting workshop. Let me give you a quick recap of how the first day went for the benefit of those who may not have joined us yesterday. So we started the day around 11 a.m. Pretoria, Harare time. And the welcome remarks were given by Newco, the Executive Secretary, CABRI, and Daisy Mukarakate, the Regional Climate Policy Advisor at UNDP, who welcomed all the participants and gave a brief overview of the inclusive budgeting and financing for climate change in Africa program, basically highlighting the partnership involving IIED, CABRI, UNDP, and IBP, as well as working with governments, civil society organizations, legislators, and parliamentarians. They also acknowledged the funding support from CEDA to the program. They further outlined the focus of the program on strengthening climate responsive budgeting in Africa, including supporting governments with technical assistance in reforms that lead to more resilient economies. They further outlined the three closely linked components of the program and gave some examples of the works that have been done in the components of the program since October 2020. Opening remarks were given by Ura Adrian, the head of the Regional Development Corporation in Africa for CEDA, who highlighted the importance of integrating climate change into budgeting and finance, and hence the need to strengthen climate budgeting reforms. She further highlighted other related programs and projects on climate change, gender, women empowerment, and so on that CEDA is supporting in the region. We then moved on to session one, which was on climate expenditure reviews and budget, basically linked to component B of the IBF-CCCA program. The first presentation was given by Mensa Royd, an associate professor of finance from the University of Ghana, which was on the second climate public expenditure institutional review that was conducted in Ghana. The second presentation was made by Rutha Rokira on climate expenditure tagging, focusing on Namibia. And we had reflections by the discussant by the name of Silke von Thanden, the senior public sector economist from the World Bank. Let me just highlight some of the key messages that came out of the presentations, starting with the presentation on the CPIR in Ghana. The first point that it is important and it's necessary to align climate relevant policy with planning and budgeting when undertaking CPIRs. This is a sure way of ensuring that climate change is integrated into development. Secondly, it is also important to identify the critical institutional and governance arrangements. And we also need to assess their effectiveness. These play a very key role in terms of mainstreaming climate change into sector plans and in implementing climate change resilient investments. It is also equally important to carry out CPIRs to distinguish, when carrying out CPIRs to distinguish domestic finance from external financing, as in most countries, climate finance is mainly from external funding, though with good climate expenditure tagging, this may not really be the case as many investments that address climate change are actually embedded in development programs. We also identified the need to emphasize the importance of using information from CPIRs in strengthening climate budgeting and finance. And to that effect, an interesting suggestion was made that CPIRs need to relate to a target with a dashboard that uses tagging to monitor whether the target is being achieved or not. From the presentation on the CBT on Namibia, the following points were key. One, it is important to start the tagging process with either a few states or a few sectors, and then build on the experiences from the pilot CBT, and then scale it up to probably an economy-wide or nationwide process. So the experiences that you gain from the piloting then helps you to then scale up the in terms of geographical coverage or sector coverage. Number two is it's a good practice that we found from the Namibian case was that the institutional responsibility for tagging can be divided across a number of sectors or ministries or departments. For instance, you have the Minister of Environment doing the classification and the weights, the Minister of Finance validating the classification and entering it into the PFM systems. So this seems to be like an excellent way of organizing a whole of government approach, though it may vary from one country to another. But I think recognizing that this is a process that involves multiple stakeholders, ministries, each one doing one specific component that builds the whole system together. Lastly, it's also about the information. That information from climate budget tagging is a very good basis for improving integration of climate change into development planning and budgeting. Then we moved on to session 2, which was on climate finance frameworks at national and subnational levels. And we had 2 presentations. The first one from Cabo Verde on the NDC financing frameworks and the SDGs, which was presented by Christopher, a strategy and policy specialist from UNDP. The second presentation from Kenya was on climate financing frameworks at the national and the country level, which was presented by Ira and Corey, a climate finance and green economy expert within the climate finance and green economy unit under the National Treasury of Kenya. In terms of key points on the presentation from Cabo Verde, we learned about the INFF and the proposal to operationalize the SDGs by identifying 5 accelerators, one of which is the green economy. This should provide an opportunity for an NDC financing framework to be seen within a more comprehensive approach to cross-cutting initiatives, whilst also being consistent with the medium-term budget framework provided by national development strategies. From Kenya, the key message that there are well-developed mechanisms for institutional coordination at central and also subnational level, at county level, with integration at various stages in the budget cycle, including plans for tagging and for including climate change in the budget circular. We then had the last session, which was on working groups on climate budget reforms. We had 4 parallel sessions, one in French, one in Portuguese, and 2 in English. Key messages out of the last session. One is the importance of effectiveness in implementation, capacity to operationalize, and the need for strategic programming to ensure adequate integration of climate change into budgets. We also emphasize the need for reforms, but to also ensure that PFM reforms integrate the needs for integrating climate change and gender in budgeting, and that countries need assistance, especially for capacity building, on the tools and approaches for effective integration. Capacity building and awareness must be economy-wide in terms of institutional targeting, including to the highest political level. Two, results of CPIRs need to be used to influence and facilitate climate change integration into budgeting and finance and capacity building, and sharing of experiences in this regard is needed. CBT tagging is just starting in most countries in Africa, but I think we need to emphasize that CBT is not an end, but must lead to improved integration of climate change into budgeting for enhanced climate action. Finally, there is need to ensure that climate and gender strategies are used to influence budgeting to get climate change and gender integrated into public financial management reforms. Those are the key messages that came out of the session yesterday, and we ended the day at exactly 1300 hours. Thank you so much. That's the presentation on the recap of yesterday. Over to you, Shan.
Great, thank you so much, Excellent, for a very well articulated summary of yesterday's events. I'm now going to start session 4, which is on transparency and accountability for gender responsive climate budgeting, the roles of formal and informal institutions. Facilitating this session is Alta Falscher. She's a South African PFM expert. Alta, alongside Josephine Ngunji, have led the development of the keynote paper, which is used for this event. So without further ado, Alta, over to you.
Thank you very much, Shanaz, and good morning, everyone. Can I just check that my panelists are online? We have Daniel Domelevo, the former Auditor General and head of the Supreme Audit Institution in Ghana. Apologies for not starting my video. And we have Phyllis McCall, who is the Director of the Parliamentary Budget Office in Kenya, and Ronald Mugabera from the Civil Society Budget Accountability Group. Welcome, Phyllis. And can I check whether Daniel is online? Shanaz, can you maybe perhaps send, or Ashani, can you send Daniel a message?
Yes, I had actually tried to send you a message saying that we're trying to get a hold of him.
Oh, great. Oh, thank you. I think we should go ahead in any case.
Yes, please.
Thanks.
Great, thanks, Alta.
Can I ask participants please to post questions in the chat. There will also be an opportunity from the floor at the end, towards the end of the session, but for in case we don't get there time-wise, please can you post into the chat. So this session is about public accountability for the financial resources mobilized for mitigation and adaptation that flow through public budgets, taking into account the gendered impacts of climate change. There are a number of reasons why domestic public accountability is important. Strong and open systems, for example, can build trust in how resources are managed and used amongst taxpayers, creditors, and donors to facilitate higher flows to climate action. It can ensure that flows are well used, balancing adaptation and mitigation appropriately in countries that are exposed to the impact of climate change and highly vulnerable. It can also ensure that flows reach the most vulnerable addressing the higher impact of climate on women and children, and ensure that flows are not wasted. Yet there is significant evidence, I think, in our systems that ordinary public expenditure in many countries in Africa is not transparent, that formal accountability systems are weak, and that citizens and their organizations lack opportunities and capacities to engage in budget processes so that these are more responsive and accountable. Legal frameworks are extensive, but often not implemented. And we all tend to focus on these issues as technical and in need of technical solutions, but the challenges and the ability to address them are in fact very much rooted in the interplay between the technical systems and the political in public finances and in public management overall. These issues for ordinary development spending is very much compounded for climate finance and expenditure. Countries generally have the policy instruments in place, like a nationally determined contribution, climate strategies for mitigation and adaptation, and some countries even have climate finance acts. But there are factors that make accountability for implementing these strategies difficult. For example, the architecture of the global climate-related financing mechanisms is ever evolving. It's not fully transparent and it's not fully tracked. This complicates transparency, engagement on, and accountability for the use of earmarked flows and the trade-offs between mitigation and adaptation and ordinary development borrowing within fiscal space that countries have. The accountability for the commitment and effective use of core budget funds to climate actions is impeded because for the most part, funding is embedded in budgets and climate objectives and benefits are difficult to separate, making reporting vulnerable to greenwashing. The capacities to interrogate the design of programs and projects for climate relevance are still developing in countries. So are the coordination capacities. And these gaps we have found in the initial domestic accountability for climate finance landscape assessments and in the keynote paper. These gaps become much worse the further away one goes from capital centers. At the local level, where specific actions tailored to specific needs, often of women, are needed, there is inadequate financing and coordination and inadequate capacities to engage. So in these initial assessments of domestic accountability for climate finance, which was undertaken in Ghana and Uganda, and from desk research in other countries, they have clearly shown up these issues. But there are also many emerging good practices where specific structures, processes, and transparency mechanisms are starting to lay down foundations for possibly improved accountability for climate finance. So with this in mind, let's welcome our illustrious panel to discuss the role that is, should, and can be played by formal accountability actors in our systems, such as supreme audit institutions and parliaments, but also by citizens and civil society to plant the seeds for and nurture climate finance accountability in our domestic systems. So if I'm going to run the session by giving each of our panelists 5 minutes to make a contribution on what they see as the importance of domestic climate finance accountabilities, where in their rare experience and knowledge they have seen green shoots for improvements in capacities and systems, and the challenges that they foresee the development of this accountability will face. We then hope to have a discussion followed by questions and responses to questions from the floor. I will ask Phyllis perhaps to go ahead and give us your initial input, please. Phyllis, can I hand over to you?
Thank you very much, and good morning to everyone. Let me start by saying that coming from the Parliament side of it is that Parliament has a role to enhance the participation, especially of the citizenry, because many parliaments get the budget already done by the executive. But if there is no process of ensuring the citizens get to be consulted, then it becomes very difficult and becomes one-sided. And every parliament should really find a way of putting in the necessary legislations and also putting in their procedures a stage at which these consultations and dialogue can take place and actually become more inclusive. The other issue is the fact that Parliament, one of their major roles is to put in place the necessary legislation. You find out that there are some key resources where there is already a law that provides what is the basic minimums that should be set aside and the procedures of how those monies get into the budget. And therefore, as we go to this climate financing, which actually is not very transparent, the architecture itself is not very transparent. And the only way that can influence is if the legislature puts in place a legal framework, pass a legislation, which could even say the quantum of those resources that will be targeted to gender-related activities. And that will be good because then it can hold the executive to account to see whether they adhere to the law by giving the specific amounts. Then the other issue relates to holding to account and enhancing transparency. And that means calling up reports of the implementation of the resources that have been set aside for the climate change issues and projects, and as necessary, take the necessary actions, because a parliament plays a major role in ensuring there's enforcement in the areas as provided by law. I think also the other thing relates to a lot of these resources come from development partners. And often the executive plays a major role in getting to know very many details, which often are never laid before a legislature to actually scrutinize and find what is really provided for. And I feel that as we move on to this area where there are a lot of many actors on these particular finances, there will be need to have more involvement of parliaments. Parliaments of today have got technical assistance, and therefore it's not like before where certain analysis couldn't be done. And I believe with the current technical support that many of the parliaments are put in place, like for example in Kenya, South Africa, and many others, these particular units can actually be given those kind of documentation on such projects that are related to climate change, and even revenue raising that relates to climate change, because they affect different segments of society differently. And therefore the legislators need to know before they pass the expenditures, the financing, or the raising of the resources, how it impacts the different levels of the society. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Philip. And just to say welcome to Daniel Damilevu, who is now in line. Daniel, can I pass the microphone to you, please, for a short input?
Yeah, thank you very much. And sorry for being late in joining. I was having some technical challenges. So, but thank God I've been able to overcome them now. And let me just add that the Supreme Audit Institutions, which many countries they refer to as the National Audit Office or the Office of the Auditor General, they have a mandate to ensure that public funds and resources are used for intended purposes. And there is also value for money. So when there is this climate-based financing, if we want to ensure transparency and accountability for it, I think the institution which is very critical is the Supreme Audit Institution. The Supreme Audit Institution will first and foremost look at whether monies are being used for the intended purposes. Today, the Supreme Audit institutions are moving to the macro level where we look at funds strategically allocated. I just heard the honorable member from parliament who says the budget may not be clear on it. So we are even asking auditors general, you know, in the past or traditionally, auditors general have been looking at accountability at the micro level, that is at the institution and transaction level. Now we are looking at the macro level. How much of the national resources are being allocated to persecute or to enhance the national agenda? For instance, if climate change is a priority for government, how much has been allocated? And again, all of you know that in Africa in particular, when you get your budget, it doesn't mean you are going to get that money. So budgets are not very reliable. So in some cases, you can see that the budget allocates so much million to an agency to ensure that there is reforestation or a climate related activity, but the budget is never released. So this tracking can be done by the auditors general. The good thing about getting the Supreme Audit institutions involved is the fact that some of them, like in Ghana, have the mandate to even enforce the law. For instance, the Constitution of Ghana provides that any payment or expenditure which is contrary to law, the Auditor General can disallow and surcharge the people involved. Therefore, if they divert money meant for climate-related activity, they can be held accountable. However, in some jurisdictions, the Supreme Audit institutions don't have that mandate. Be that as it may, they at least have the right to report to Parliament that monies are not being used as approved or being misapplied. And in most of the laws for the Supreme Audit institutions, which is in consonant with the international standard for Supreme Audit institutions, the Supreme Audit institutions are allowed these days to share their audit report with the public. For instance, in Ghana, anybody who wants to find out can look at the Audit Service Act, Section 23. It says that the Auditor General, immediately he presents his report to the Speaker of Parliament, should publish it for Ghanaians also to know how the resources are being used. So that brings a better accountability. People will see that the money is being used for the intended purpose or being misused. So this is the role that if we engage the Supreme Court institutions, it can do. My concluding remark before we move forward is the fact that however, there is not much awareness on the side of the auditors general that they should look at climate-related activities. So those of you who are at the forefront, I wish that we engage more of the Supreme Audit institutions and get them involved. You know, they have a lot on their plate. So if you don't catch their attention, their focus may not be where you think they should be looking at. I will stop here and then we'll continue later if there is another issue. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ronald, can I ask you please to go ahead with your input?
Thank you very much. I want to thank my fellow panelists and our moderator for this great discussion. I am Ronald Mugobera. I'm working with the Civil Society Budget Advocacy Group in Uganda, and I'm going to share about social accountability from the civil society perspective. Well, I'll begin by saying that by acknowledging the fact that climate change is a serious economic development phenomenon, as opposed to being a mere environment challenge that the money hits and we count losses. And the role of civil society in ensuring climate financing and accountability in any country is paramount. Civil society we work in communities which
Sorry,
experience.
Ronald, I'm sorry to disturb. The sound is very bad. Would it be possible to adjust your microphone volume?
Okay.
You can do it at the bottom left corner. There's an up arrow.
Bottom left corner, yes.
There's an up arrow, and then you can say audio settings, and then you can adjust the microphone slider to the maximum.
Okay. Is that okay?
It's still a little bit soft. Can you move a little bit closer to the mic?
Okay, fine. Let me try to. No, I am. Hello, is that fine now for me?
Yes, I can hear you.
That is better, yeah.
clear. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Otherwise, saying that civil society plays an important role in ensuring that there is effective accountability in climate finances. Civil society players stay or work in communities where these challenges are faced and where actual public projects, among which include climate financing, are implemented. But for civil society to effectively participate in climate financing and accountability, we need to have serious entry points in the public finance management system of the country. I want to take an example of the budget process right away from the time of setting priorities during the budget formulation process. And this now calls for a participatory budget approach in each and every country where civil society actively participates in coming up with priorities, among which include climate change issues during the budget formulation process, so that it cascades through the other processes like approval and allocation of funds. My colleague talked about that allocations in most cases don't translate into releases, but if we have allocations, then we can have better ways of demanding that the actual releases are made, and even doing the accountability itself. Along the different entry points, the civil society needs to be equipped in terms of finances and technical ability to effectively participate in these platforms. As I said prior, the civil society actors are in touch with communities that experience climate change challenges and in communities where government actually puts public investments in form, among which include climate change investments. It will be paramount that society generate evidence, and this now calls for research to make policy contributions that are informed by research. I think in addition to that, civil society is also need to have good collaboration with different government entities. The Office of the Auditor General is very important because we may need to have to furnish the Office of the Auditor General with relevant information, evidences as regards to misuse of public funds in areas where they may not effectively reach. I want to talk about the climate financing and accountability landscape that was done in Uganda, like our moderator alluded to. It was, for instance, found out that in Ugandan government, I mean within Uganda, Parliament is very active during the budget formulation process, but its participation in budget implementation and oversight role is not very strong. So I think there's also need for Parliament to strengthen its implementation and oversight role when it comes to the latter stages of the budget process. Thank you, colleagues. I would like to end here for now, as I'm through as we continue with this deliberation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ronald. Can I ask the panelists and perhaps Phyllis and Daniel to respond, but I think it also touches on civil society. Is there a need, Daniel, for Auditor Generals, the Supreme Audit institutions, to develop specific technical capacities around climate finance? So, for example, to be able to audit the climate budget tagging information that many countries are introducing, or to be able to audit the technical aspects of mitigation claims of projects, for example. And similarly, Phyllis, if you can think whether you see it as a good aspect of parliamentary development to develop specific committee capacities or focal points, and how should that then be managed at the parliamentary level with the ordinary development spending oversight? So should there be a climate change committee that coordinates with a budget committee, for example? And Ronald, if you can cast your mind over how civil society can overcome the challenges of the technical capacities that are needed to engage on climate finance, given that these are often scarce skills, and also the need for coordination amongst civil society. Daniel, can I start with you if you have any responses?
Yes, thank you very much. The answer is definitely we need capacity building for the Supreme Audit institutions. If we go back a bit, you realize that Supreme Audit institutions are very good at financial audit. They look at the figures and etc. But to be sure that the money has been used for the intended purpose and there is value for money, there is the need for what we call technical verification. There, a lot of Supreme Audit institutions don't have the capacity. It does not necessarily mean that we must have technical people within the Supreme Audit institutions. When you come to Ghana, yes, we have a performance audit unit where you can find environmentalists, you can find engineers, you can find surveyors, etc. They are all there. And so they can do it in-house. But every Supreme Audit institution also does what we call joint audits. If they lack capacity in an area, we can get people who have that skill to join the Supreme Audit to do what we call a joint audit. Again, Supreme Auditors are able to outsource the audits. For instance, in Ghana, if you go to the website of Ghana Audit Service, you see that there are a lot of audits that are being done by outsourcing to the firms or consultants who have expertise in that area. So as for the skills, is very important. If we limit the audit of climate financing to only papers to see where are the payment vouchers, I don't think we will be getting value for money. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Phyllis, can I hand to you?
Yes, it is. I believe in our case in Kenya, climate change is handled by the Environment Committee. So that is actually the committee with the mandate to look into the issues, to inquire the issues of climate, to look at the issues of financing. But then it has to work together with other committees, because the Public Accounts Committee, for example, will go on to audit each and every program, even the climate-related programs. And therefore, the other institution that cuts across is the Parliamentary Budget Office, because we have a technical officer who really looks at the environmental issues. That is the officer who actually goes to the Environment Committee, looks at the issues, both policy, budget, and any research they require related to public finance. And actually that officer is logged in, because that's the officer I proposed that he should also join this particular session. And because he's the one who gives the backstopping And really, the people with the institutional memory becomes that budget officer who is linked to that committee. At the same time, there is a public accounts committee. And in our case in Kenya, there is an officer who looks into the public accounts committee. They are not in here, but that's the officer who look at the issues and relate across to other officers and see what happens. But then we are talking about climate financing and we are bringing about gender. So there also has to be somebody who looks at about the issues of gender, because climate issues don't affect all of us equally. And for example, when Kenya decided to increase the taxation through the gas that is used for cooking, then the people get. Yes.
Would you be able to speak a little bit slower? The interpreters are having difficulty interpreting.
In following me. Okay,
Yes.
sorry. I normally talk very fast, maybe because I talk about public finance all the time. So what I was saying, just to recap, is that there is the Environment Committee in the case of Kenya, which is actually the committee that looks at climate-related issues. But then I'm saying the Public Accounts Committee, which follows up what has been done by the Supreme Audit, also has a role to play. And therefore, the focal point is actually our technical staff. That is the Parliamentary Budget Office. Because for the two committees, we have an officer who goes to those committees and looks at those issues. But at the same time, we are here not talking about only climate financing, but also the issues of gender responsive climate issues. And I want to give just a small example because in our case in Kenya, we had banned charcoal. That is actually relates to environment. That's a burning of the trees for fuel. But then at the same time, we were supposed to put a policy to reduce the cost of cooking gas. But now in the finance bill, that was reversed. And we now again started taxing gas highly. So that has an impact on the climate. And that's why we are saying it is a whole array of issues which cut across several committees in Parliament, not just one committee. Because there will be a committee looking at taxation, there's a committee looking just at the climate issues, the policy issues, and all what is related. And therefore, that has to have a vocal point where we have technical capacity to advise those particular committees which are specialized. Thank you. I hope I slowed down.
Thank you. It was nonetheless very interesting and valuable. Ronald, can I turn to you to contemplate the capacity issues that civil society faces?
Well, thank you very much. I think indeed technical capacity gaps exist, especially on the side of civil society. We have different strands of civil society players. We have civil society players who have been looking at climate change issues only. And we have civil society members who have been looking at the issue of public finance management in isolation. In isolation. And now this one the two have been operating at, if I can borrow the term, at parallel. But for us to have a clear understanding so that we can effectively see civil society organizations participate in climate financing and accountability, there is now need for public finance management civil societies to also now build capacities in climate financing and accountability, so that there is now that targeted advocacy towards climate financing and accountability. And now this one calls for, like I said before, cooperation between government entities that are, for instance, that are doing audit, Office of the Auditor General, the Ministries of Finance, Planning and Economic Development of the different countries, because these are the custodians of public finance management reforms in the country. But we also need to have the planning side that is responsible for climate, for policy in the country, for the policy direction of the country, for instance, the National Planning Authority. So if there's that kind of tripartite arrangement, that civil society is part of that, through the different corporations and coordinations, joint activities held, you may find that there is a transfer of skills, public finance management skills, climate change skills, policies, and others to civil society. But also civil societies, we can also have peer exchanges, like peer learning, like exchange visits. I'm very sure that there are countries that are doing very well in issues of climate financing and accountability. There could be need for us to benchmark from those. How are they doing it? Most of countries that are in the same operating context. Thank you.
Thank you very much. In all the input so far, we've had a number of references to cooperation and links between parliaments, between the Supreme Audit institutions and civil society to strengthen one another and to strengthen transparency through joint action, through the demand and supply of information, and to strengthen accountability. And we've also had some references about how the formal structures can change. So which committees are assigned, what capacities are you building in the Auditor General? My next question to the three of you is about how these formal changes, to what degree do they need to be backed with informal cooperation in the background between specific actors in institutions? And what is your experience of how that then works to address the very difficult political factors that often impact on whether accountability results from the formal structures and changes in systems? Daniel, can I start with you, whether in your experience, how informal coordination with civil society or with Parliament has worked to strengthen the role of the Supreme Audit Institution and the role of Parliament and civil society then?
Yeah, thank you again. In my case, or in the case of Ghana, the legal framework actually allows the Auditor General to collaborate with any member of the society, institutions, organizations, so to be able to carry out his or her job. So there have been a lot of collaboration with the civil society organizations that demand accountability and transparency for public funds. A lot of the what we call performance audits that we do in Ghana during the time that I was the Auditor General, many times were informed by complaints that the civil societies bring, because they have network in the country, and they may tell you that, look, even though monies have been allocated for the purpose of reforestation, our monitoring shows that it is not happening. At times, they complain about small mines that have closed and they have degraded the environment, and there is nothing like reclamation, but monies have been set aside. So that trigger an audit of this issue, and at times we bring the finding. As for Parliament, let me say that the Supreme Auditor is more or less an officer of Parliament. So we work very closely together. There are at times that when I was in office, I even received letter from Parliament that can you do this audit for us, because we have a concern. And it is provided under the Audit Service Act. The Parliament can request. So such request comes and then we go. So we have good collaboration with the actors. The problem is, because the Supreme Audit Institution is supposed to be independent, some interpret the independence to mean I can collaborate with people, which I said, no, that is a wrong interpretation. The independence means you don't influence or dictate to me what I should do. However, you can always give me ideas and I can always collaborate with you. So that one is there. And let me say that there is even an international standard which was issued by the International Organization of Supreme Audit Institutions on how to collaborate with the various actors. So that mechanism is in place. The problem is the awareness in the Supreme Audit Institutions. Some are not even aware that they can work with other stakeholders so to add value to the work that they do. Thanks.
Thank you. And I think given what Ronald has been saying, he would agree with you that collaboration is essential to pinpoint where high risk is in climate finance. Phyllis, can I throw a last question in your direction? And that is around how national, the issue around climate finance becomes increasingly dire the closer you get to the ground, to grassroots, the capacities to manage it and engage and hold accountable. How can national parliaments collaborate in order to influence how climate finances are used on the ground, as you have been saying, also to look at equity issues and how it impacts differently on women compared to men?
Yes, once just first to add a word about collaboration. Yes, there are very many opportunities for collaboration, but I think the major challenge is the capacity of understanding of what we mean of climate financing. It's not a matter of mapping expenditure into projects that we suspect are climate related. And I've just seen a lot of the work which has been done on this area, and it's a bit on a mapping of that expenditure into projects that we presume are climate change oriented. And therefore that calls for more capacity to be built, especially on the legislature. The capacity needs to be built to get specialization on issues related to climate analysis and understand when we say we are floating a green bond, what does that mean? What expenditures can those resources not be utilized under? And then find out a way, how can we engage outside just the regular process of budgeting that we engage, because that one is already known, that this is the expenditure, you look at it, the deficit, the borrowing, and all those issues. But there is a question, how do we identify an environment-targeted, climate-targeted expenditure that it needs to be tagged and that needs to be followed during the in-year reporting and monitoring? How do we tag a revenue-raising measure that has an impact on climate change and tag it and follow it? How do we get disaggregated data related to gender, tag it and follow it? So that capacity is a major challenge that will need to be borrowed. Yes, we can say we do have something on ground, but that's something. So I feel the greatest challenge is that specific specialized capacity and sort of thing. Thank you.
I agree, and it is technically quite difficult to do, but it's a necessary first step. Can I ask the audience, we have 7 minutes left. Are there any burning questions from the audience that you would like to put? Please just raise your hand and I'll hand the microphone over, or type a question in the chat. I don't see any hands at the moment, and no questions, but please, if you do have a question, please raise that. Can I follow up on my question around decentralization of climate capacities? And Ronald, can I turn to you whether you think it is a critical function of civil society to work with communities at the local level to build the capacity of communities and community representatives to engage their local governments and to engage higher up the expenditure chain on climate finance issues.
Yes, thank you very much. I think this is a pertinent question because with decentralization, you see that much of service delivery efforts have shifted from the national government to the local governments. And building the capacity of the local governments and communities is very essential because this is actually where the actual climate change issues occur. But now the challenge is beyond building their capacity. Are they facilitated to do their work? Because building your capacity is one thing. You might build your capacity, but when you're not facilitated, you may sit there with your skills. But we need now to see, after building capacity, is there adequate financing? Are they equipped? Do they have the mandate? I want to give an example in Uganda. In Uganda, we have decentralization and local governments. The highest local government are districts, and these districts have natural environment officers. But the challenge is that they are inadequately financed, and this now has affected implementation of the different climate change policies in those districts. We appreciate government effort to decentralize, but after decentralization, we must be having adequate equipment in terms of finance and other necessary inputs to make sure that these offices work effectively. For communities, yes, it's very important to do awareness in communities that people should understand the challenges associated with climate change, because much as they are affected by the effects of climate change, you might find that they're also perpetrators or part of the cause of the climate change or causes of climate change vagaries that we see around. They're the ones cultivating. So if they're not equipped in how to cultivate well to mitigate effects of climate change, you might find that again the effects will last longer. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So what I'm hearing yes, it is the demand for accountability and access that's an issue from communities, but it also very much the ability of local governments and the financing of local governments to coordinate, plan and implement climate adaptation projects and interventions. We have 3 minutes left. There was a question from Abram Rugo Murio from the IBP program in Ghana, in fact, about whether there are any examples of cooperation between government and CSOs. And Neil, your hand is also raised. Do you want to pose your question, Neil? And then we can open it to the panel to answer those last questions.
Thanks, Alta. And let me just say that it's good to see Phyllis as part of the panel. I posted in the chat that she is one of the esteemed founding members of CABRI, so I thought I should just mention that. Mine is more of a comment, but I'm sure the panelists will want to respond, and it deals with the issue of fiscal decentralization. So how governments are arranged, or how countries are arranged in terms of their governance decentralization. And I suppose the obvious point is that that is as per the constitution of a country. So I mean, how Kenya is decentralized is informed by the constitution and related legislation, and the same with South Africa. And that obviously has a form of decentralization that in cases is much deeper than in others, right? And in some countries, I mean, that decentralization is also quite informal. So in thinking about how governments or local governments collaborate with CSOs at a local level, should take that into account. in terms of what are the powers of local governments. How do funds flow, and for what purpose do those funds flow? Because that awareness, I think, will also help in CSOs in thinking about, what type of collaboration can take place of the local government. So, for instance, in South Africa, I mean, it's if you're wanting to influence policy, for instance, it's probably best to locate that with national government than attempting to influence a local government that will be largely responsible for implementation and may not even have the resources to undertake a specific program. And then the capability issue, I think it's an important one, and one that we often don't address when between CSOs and local governments. So what is it that governments are able to undertake in terms of their own capabilities, which is about their powers, etc. Thank you, Alta.
Thank you very much, Neil, and very good points made. Shanaz, can I beg 3 minutes from you to give each of the panelists a minute to conclude and respond perhaps to the last issues that were raised, which will take 3 minutes into our break.
Okay, just 2 minutes. 2 minutes.
Okay, thank you. So can I hand over to the panelists without any further ado for a last very brief input? Thank you. Phyllis, please go ahead.
Can I start
first on my screen? Yes.
Yes, thank you very much. And thank you, Neil. It was great to see your face, although across the technology. And thank you for recognizing me being a founder. Just in a minute to say, this was a good engagement, but to say beyond the challenge of capacity, there is the challenge of collaboration, in particular with civil society, when it comes to parliamentarians. There is always a bit of suspicion with those two institutions, and it revolves around the political bit of thinking. And I think the best way that can be done, collaboration can be enhanced, is if we get the necessary legislation or in the standing orders of parliamentarians. At least with Supreme Court, Supreme Audit, that is in our case, call it audit. The auditor is a staff of parliament to some extent, although independent. So there isn't a problem of collaboration, but I think on the other side there is. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Phyllis. Daniel, please go ahead.
Thank you very much. Neil, you have made a very important point. In Africa in particular, decentralization is done administratively, but when it comes to fiscal decentralization, where resources are supposed to be released for the lower levels of government to carry out their activities and account for it appropriately, that is where the challenge is. And I find that across the whole continent and even beyond. I've worked in several countries in Africa, including South Africa, Zimbabwe, Malawi, Zambia, so I know what happens in Africa. Having been a former staff of the World Bank, I am very used to the situation. So fiscal decentralization is a challenge. In Ghana, there's a good collaboration between the Supreme Audit Institution called Ghana Audit Service, or the Office of the Auditor General, and several civil service organizations. For instance, there is one called Center for Democratic Development, another one called Ghana Anti-Corruption Coalition, another one, Ghana Integrity Initiative, several of them. When I was in office, we had every 3 months a meeting. We have a meeting with the key civil society organizations that are interested in transparency and accountability. And that's why they bring their issues to the table. That, well, our network has picked this signal. Auditor General, are you interested? And so that's where many times we get the feedback. So the point I would like to end on is this. Any public servant in any country should know that the role is to serve the interests of the public. And no one single person can do it alone. The best way to do it is to leverage on others so that you can harness those efforts for the betterment of the society. So there is this thinking at times by public servants that, look, I am in the office, so nobody else should tell me anything to do or should not come near me. I don't think is the way to go. We must try and collaborate with our legislators, our civil society, and even the public. In fact, in Ghana, we have even developed an application called Citizens Eye. If you Google it, you will find it. Or if you go to Apple Store or Play Store, you will find Citizen Eye, where anybody in the country can complain about abuses of resources, etc., like environmental budget being misused. If you are informed, we follow it up. So collaboration is the way forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Daniel. And Ronald, your minute.
Thank you very much to my fellow panelists and our moderator. I want to end by saying that, yes, we have talked about collaboration with the government entities and other partners on issues of climate financing and accountability. But I would like to see this collaboration not in passive form, but rather active, whereby civil society is actively involved, not just being involved, invited at town hall meetings, and that is all. Are we part of the policy formulation process? Are we part of the budget process and effective participation? Are we accessing what I can call the privileged information around climate financing, as opposed to just seeing projects being implemented? So we need to go beyond the passive and have effective participation. Lastly, I should talk about decentralization. Yes, decentralization, we must have effective equipment of those people or of the duty bearers at local government level. But again, we need to also enforce downward accountability, where the citizens in communities who are actually affected by the effects of climate change take lead in demanding for accountability for the different climate finances. I want to thank you very much, and I end it here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Daniel, you asked for 30 seconds for a quick suggestion, am I right? Daniel?
Thank you very much. I want to make a quick suggestion. Audit institutions well involved in ensuring transparency and accountability for climate financing, as well as the gender issue we talked about. There is the need to get Supreme Audit Institution, APRUSAI. Then we have the Eurosai, we have the PASAI. There are regional bodies. When they pick it up, it becomes a collective effort. So for instance, if you want the Auditors General in Africa to be deeply involved in this, I will urge you to approach AFROSAI, that is Africa Organization of Supreme Audit Institutions. Then they make it a topic or an agenda to be discussed by all the Auditors General. There you will see a better traction. Thank you.
Thank you. Shanaz, I hand over to you. Thank you very much for the panelists and for the participation, and I hope you all enjoyed the session.
Great. Thank you so much, Alta. Thank you to all the panelists for sharing those very important insights on how the role of the Supreme Audit institutions, Parliament, and civil society can be strengthened to allow them to fulfill their oversight function. Thank you so much. So let's go in now for a very short break, a 5-minute break, which means we will be back here at 14 minutes past 11. So thank you all. See you back at 14 minutes past 11. Thank you.
Hi, Josephine. Can we please do a quick audio test and visual test?
Yes. There we go. Is that clear?
Yes, it's clear. Can you count to 3 for me?
1, 2, 3.
Thank you very much.
Okay, can you hear the lobby music? I hope it's not too loud.
No, we actually can't. I can't hear it. Thank you.
Perfect, perfect, thank you.
Thank you. Hi, Fidel. Are you available to do a quick audio and visual test? Hi, Gerald. Can we do a quick audio and visual test?
Hello, hello, hello.
Hi, Balogi. Can you just turn on your video so we can confirm that we can see you?
Okay.
Hi, sorry, you're gonna have to mute your mic, unmute your mic.
Okay.
Yes.
Can you see me?
Yes, I can see and hear you. Can you count to 3 for me?
1, 2, 3.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
All right, thanks.
Chad, are we good to start now?
Hi, yes, we are. Thank you.
Great. So welcome everyone back from the break. I hope you were able to grab a cup of coffee. I know I did. So I'm really pleased now to introduce the next session, session 5 on transparency and accountability for gender responsive climate budgeting, the interaction between ministries of finance and oversight actors. This session will be facilitated by Paul Steele. He is the chief economist at the International Institute for Environment and Development, IIED. For those who don't know Paul, he has been leading the work under Component C of the IBF-CCA program on strengthening climate accountability and transparency. Paul, over to you.
Thanks, Shanaz. Welcome everyone, and it's great to have such a big group online on the second day of our peer learning exchange. We're going to follow on from the previous session with a focus on how can NGOs, media, Parliament and Auditor General support and hold government accountable on climate finance. And we've got a number of speakers, and at the end I'm going to invite some of our government counterparts who aren't on the formal panel list, but in the audience to actually give their reaction. So please be ready if I ask you to interject. Even if you're new to climate finance, I'm sure you'll have some views. So to set the scene, we're going to invite Josephine Ngugi, who's from Researcher Plus in Kenya, and who, with Alta from the previous session, worked on the keynote paper that set the scene for these two sessions. So Josephine, over to you. And we very much hope that as well as the focus on climate finance, you'll also pick up the focus on gender budgeting and the interaction between the two. Josephine, 5 minutes for you, please. I'm going to keep you to time if you don't mind.
Thank you, Paul. I will try to keep to time. So there are a couple of points I'd like us to keep at the back of our minds, especially if we're talking about the ecosystem in action. And I really loved a couple of points that came up from the last session. So the first one is, women continue to be driven into deeper poverty levels as a result of climate change because they're the first and worst hit. So that's important. Women definitely respond differently to impacts of climate change, and this is as a result of various factors: education, knowledge, access to information, ownership, and access to assets. And here I'm thinking about agriculture and the role that agriculture plays in the GDP. Women are definitely excluded from decision-making processes at household, community, regional, and national levels. CSOs, in a sense, indicate, or there's a claim that they represent some of the marginalized groups, and women, refugees, people with disability, minority groups are some of the different groups that CSOs claim to represent, and they do represent them. So I use the word claim lightly. So then what roles can CSOs play? So I think for me, one that was raised in the last session and I really want to speak to is around pushing for and supporting meaningful, inclusive public participation processes at all stages of the budget process, be it planning, implementation, audit. And this can be with regards to strong facilitation, it can be convening, it can be an advocacy role, and just ensuring that women who, say, for example, if we look at the agricultural sector, where 70% are smallholder, 70% of women are smallholder farmers, that it's ensuring that these 70%, there is a representation of this 70% as we're talking about planning, implementation, audit, in deciding what mitigation and adaptation plans need to be prioritized and included in the budget. And of course, what was mentioned, the importance of ensuring that these plans are implemented and the audits are done in an inclusive way. The second thing is around access to information. Now, this involvement will not happen if information is not accessible. And to think about what is, if we're to unpack this information, it's timely, it's quality information, it's accessible, it's comprehensive, right? And it does speak to how different gender is involved. It does speak to the amounts that are addressing different issues around gender or people with disability. So you're able to track and trace. And I really liked Phyllis's point around moving it past, or would I say simplicity in the tracking. So I really liked that point. And here, one of the options that CSOs could take is possibly using gender responsive budgeting tools that have been used before and using and adding another lens, that's a climate change lens to that, and building on that, because that's something that has been tried and tested, and it's something that's possible to adapt. But I put it out there for something to consider. The third thing that was raised was around capacity building. And here I'm thinking about marginalized groups. And I said these are women, refugees, minority communities, people with disability, and also most importantly, thinking about the intersectionality. You'll find a woman who's a refugee and she's a person with disability. The way she is affected is definitely different from someone who perhaps doesn't have all those things in play. So being able to build the capacity of these marginalized groups to on climate financing analysis and different engagement points. And on top of that, also working with community groups and building their capacity. Coordination and collaboration was raised to amplify citizens' priorities and keeping these priorities at the center of everything we do, ensuring that women priorities are consistently and continuously put on the table and don't transition and do transition from one place to the other. And I liked Ronald's points around bringing sector and budget experts together for action. And lastly is around advocacy. And I see this in two ways. So it's strategic engagement with government that moves policy into action. And it's either civil societies are sitting on the table and being conscious and continuous representatives of citizens, women, children, and there can be an interest. But it's also about sometimes being door openers for these groups to be able to come into the space and represent their issues. So I just wanted to raise those 5 points to have at the back of our minds as we move the conversations forward. Thank you, Neil. Thank you, Paul.
Great, thanks, Josephine, for setting the scene so well with a strong focus on gender and its aspects on climate finance. So we're now going to turn to Emmanuel Aifa from Send Ghana, which along with Ronald from CS BAG wrote the background papers for the keynote paper, which we've all been looking at to position this session. So you have heard Emmanuel from Josephine about the role of information, representation, capacity, and advocacy. Maybe you could share whether that's how it is panning out in Ghana in terms of how the debate on climate finance between CSOs, the media, and government is going, please.
Thank you for the opportunity. I think I need to set the context because we are looking at issues of GRB, gender responsive budgeting within climate financing arena in Ghana. To set a context in terms of gender responsive budgeting, Ghana as a country, it was around 2005 when the finance ministers conference was held. I mean, the Commonwealth Finance Minister Conference was held and GRB was the focus. So immediately after the 2005, in 2007, the government approved a memo a memo was sent to the cabinet, which was approved for the Ministry of Finance and Economic Planning at the time, and the Ministry of Women, Children, and Gender to implement GRB, which actually started in 2008. In terms of that, the focus was really climate issues were really not part of the key focus, because initially we were looking at health and education ministries, and then I think later on food and agriculture came on board. But even in food and agriculture, of course, the focus was really not in the area of climate finance issues. Since then, what happened was that in our budget preparation process, and I think the person who just spoke about it, in the budget preparation process, we have what's called budget guidelines. And from 2008, the Ministry of Finance make it as a requirement in preparing budgets to, as a matter of priority, focus on GRB issues at all levels. And that has been the practice in terms of budget guidelines going out there. Basically, the focus is on to assess the situation of women, men, boys, and girls, because the fact is GRB is not just about women issues alone. Also, there are specific issues in respect of budgetary allocations, specific budgetary allocation that should align gender-sensitive issues. But if you look at it in respect of climate financing or climate change issues, and that is where we've not been doing very well. In the paper that we just we finished presenting, I think just last year with Oxfam, we highlighted issues like that. Really not focusing on looking at agriculture, generally in agriculture in general, which for us, issues of climate change is a component. And we thought that we do commit to really focus on climate change financing, and as that is what about the issue of gender responsive budget and climate change financing.
Great, thanks, Emmanuel. So it looks like gender responsive budgeting got a bit of a head start compared to climate budgeting, but now the challenge is to bring them together. So now we're very pleased to turn to Fola Adejomo from the Ministry of Finance in Nigeria, who has worked both on gender budgeting and on climate budgeting. So you're very well placed, Fola, to tell us about how these two can come together and what the experience of Nigeria has been. So 5 minutes for you, please.
All right, thank you very much, Paul, and fellow panelists. The experience has been very, I hope you can hear me.
Yes, hear you very well, thank you.
Okay, so the Nigerian experience has been very revealing, and it shows clearly that it is very important to approach gender budgeting issues in a very holistic manner. So I speak first of all to how we have engaged with and what further push we're expecting from the parliament in order to ensure that we drive this to achieve the desired conclusions. So for instance, the parliament in Nigeria has what we call the power of appropriation. So it is at the level of the parliament that decisions are made as to what amounts of monies are voted for, different kinds of projects and programs in the annual budget. Now, rather than being complementary, most of the time, the relationship between the Ministry of Finance and especially the entire executive and the parliament has been somewhat adversarial, such that as Phyllis mentioned in her presentation, when budgets are presented to the National Assembly, that's the parliament in Nigeria, whereas you would expect that they would just go ahead and do, their review work on what has been presented, we end up having a nearly completely different set of projects, churned out at the end of the appropriation process. So what this does is that it robs the budget of the capacity to fulfill the dreams, of gender-based gender issues, climate issues, all the important details that have been factored into the budget. So for us to achieve this, we have we recognize that it's important to have at the level of legislation to have inclusive collaboration, in the sense that from all the stages of the budget preparation, we involve the parliament. So right from the conception of the budget, right from the stages, of determining what the priorities of government for a particular session will be, to the strategic planning, preparation, and all of that, even through execution. The parliament is involved such that we minimize the incidence of unqualified and unprioritized programs and projects finding their way into the budget. So we recognize very clearly that we need more collaboration with the parliament. Also, it's important that parliaments across Africa should recognize the need to have nationally appropriate legislative response, to climate finance issues. Several times, as I've mentioned, we have a kind of legislation that seems to be productive, in the sense that certain kinds of legislations, when turned out, they end up violating the spirit of existing legislations. So when you have the need, for example, to promote a level of implementation of certain kind of projects, you may end up having other existing legislations which are working against the new ones. So we recognize the need for complementarity between national budget legislations and climate legislation, and the entirety of the social goals as is. So issues around poverty reduction, access to energy, disaster risk management, all of these are what we consider very essential, for entire and holistic view of the budget processing system, the ecosystem. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Fola, and very useful overview in terms of the relationship between Parliament and the Ministry of Finance, which responds very nicely to what Phyllis was saying in the Kenyan context in the previous session. But I'm sure we'll come back to you with comments and questions. And I would like to invite participants to write in the chat their comments or questions, which we can pick up hopefully later in the session. But we'd now like to give the floor to get the perspective from media. And we have a journalist from Uganda, Gerald Tenyewa, who's a climate involved journalist from Uganda. Gerald, are you with us, and can you speak for 5 minutes about the experience of the media engaging with government on climate in Uganda?
Thank you so much, Paul. In Uganda, we've been covering the issues of gender extensively. And from a climate change point of view, we often capture the women as victims of climate change. And women, when we have disasters like landslides or floods, which are taking place in different parts of the country, we often look at who has been affected and who has been affected most. So in most cases, the picture of the woman or women and children comes out prominently in our studies. But the women are also champions in their own right and in their own localities. We have areas in Eastern Uganda that are frequently hit by drought and floods. But then you find that the supporting pillars in these communities, often the women, they ensure that they put in place actions that will be able to support themselves, the women, the men within that community. For instance, in Katakwi in Eastern Uganda, where I'm focusing, where I'm going to do a climate change film, there are women there who are part of resilient social networks that support them when they are in trouble. When a disaster strikes, they will go on and support the women who are most hit by a certain disaster. They are also part of income generation activities that will be able to empower them and get them out of trouble in case there's a lean season where they have not managed to produce as much as they should. And women have also been able to diversify in different economic activities. For instance, most of them could be farmers, but they also supplement their incomes with fishing or fishmongering. And of course, this helps them. If one sector is hit, like farming during cases of drought, then they are able to shift. So we've covered these stories many times, but what is lacking is the complete picture, where we tie into climate change financing and this aspect of gender. As a country, we've done very well in terms of capturing issues of gender and even coming up with laws. We have a ministry on gender, and most recently, a law on climate change has been passed by Parliament. And the issue of gender is also embedded there in the climate change policy. But at the moment, what is lacking is the connectivity of seeing the whole picture, how women and children and youth and the men are factored in when it comes to financing. And there's a lot of work which is going on by civil society organizations to be able to analyze and then cause discussions that can be able to engage government and have collaborations in there. And once this happens, hopefully soon, that's when we can start seeing the bigger picture when it comes to climate change financing that goes to women. But in many cases, when you look at areas that have been hit by disasters, there could be programs that are focusing on financing, the climate change financing, but then they don't have targeted interventions for women. And some of the women, actually most women at the local level, do not know about the existence of these projects, which are happening either in their districts or in districts that neighbor where disasters happen. So to summarize, from a media perspective, we often cover lots of stories from the disaster angle, but also stories of empowerment where women are champions, where women are supporting their communities to come out of disasters and lead resilient livelihoods. But we have huge gaps in terms of seeing the bigger picture where climate change financing comes into play. I'll stop there for now. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Gerald. Yeah, that's, I think, a very interesting point. It's a kind of perennial challenge. Obviously, people prefer reading about very detailed stories of people's lives, but the big picture, as you say, the policies are not necessarily what people are so interested in and what newspaper editors particularly want to share with their readers. But very well put. Okay, now we'd like to open it up to the, we have one more speaker, hopefully Fideli Randria from an NGO in a network in Madagascar is online. And I would invite you, Fideli, to please speak in Portuguese. And there is translation available. You have to go into the second to right-hand tab at the bottom, and on the interpretation tab, press English, and then you'll be able to hear Portuguese, the translation. So Fideli, please feel free to speak in Portuguese. Over to you for 5 minutes.
Greetings to everyone. I hope you can hear me. First off, I would rather just speak in English because I can't speak Portuguese here in Madagascar. We actually speak French, but
apologies.
All right, all right. I think I am going to make my intervention in English.
Sure.
All right. Thanks for giving me the floor. I am going to present you some of the 3 points in my interventions. First off, the policies and strategies for climate change environment in Madagascar. Second off, the part of the budget engagement allocated to help the climate and gender and to promote these 2 topics. And in the end, I am going to present some of the advancements and the challenges for Madagascar related to the fight against the climate change and the gender issues. All right, for Madagascar, the CSOs are mainly engaged in promoting the governance and mainstream of adaptations, in which there are 3 strategic areas. The intervention of the CSOs in promoting transparency related to the budget that are going to be allocated for the projects related to climate change. The second strategic area is implementing a priority sectoral action program. And the third strategic area is financing adaptation to climate change. But the CSOs in Madagascar, they are not affecting budget yet for the climate change issues. We're actually acting through the institutional and technical support by using the interventions of the CSOs along the municipal planning scheme. About the policies, Madagascar has been signing the Protocol of Kyoto, the Paris Agreement. For the local policies, the ministry in charge of the environment and sustainable development is principally taking all the matters to promote the climate change and the resilience about the disasters. But yet, we cannot say that the government is effectively managing the climate change so that the adverse effects on different sectors are minimized. But we can still say that the Ministry of Environment has been implementing the National Plan of Adaptation and mainstream of adaptation. Although the strategies to fight against the climate change is tackling the consequences to reduce the social and ecological vulnerabilities. And concerning the mitigation, the government tried to address its causes and aims to limit greenhouse gas emission and enhance carbon sequestration by sinks. I am going to present you now the part of budget allocated to help the climate change and gender issues in Madagascar. Still, the government is not effectively amending budgets to deal with the climate change. So that is also for the gender issues. But for nowadays, the ministry in charge of the environment has been looked down, as we could still say that the part of budget for allocated for the climate change is even below 1% of the budget of the country. So it is still low. Plus, the country is also economically and socially a bit weak, so we cannot afford to allocate much budget into this. The country is relying essentially on the climate funds, such as the green funds for climate or the adaptation funds for least developed countries or specific climate change fund. We cannot still say that talking about the level of engagement of the country in climate and gender, there is not much budget allocated for these two topics. So I am not going to present much things, but still the CSOs of MAD actively trying to take actions and take the responsibilities by supporting technically and institutionally the local communities. And the local communities are nowadays, they are also putting more importance about these two issues. And I think I'm going to stop right here. And your questions are the welcome. Thank you very much.
Great, thanks, Fidele. And yeah, I'm aware that Madagascar has a very rich biodiversity and unique flora and fauna and forests. So it's great to hear from you about how the local communities in your civil society network is engaging in those issues. So now we're going to see if any, particularly some of our government officials from the audience, would like to make comments, and you're welcome to speak in Portuguese, in French, or in English. We have translations for all of them. So I'd like to see, apologies for putting you on the spot, but just to see if you have anything to add from your perspective in terms of the role of media, NGOs, Parliament in your country around gender and climate issues. So I wondered, Dlamini Simbongili from the Ministry of Economic Planning in Swaziland. Have you got anything to add? Okay, maybe Dlamini has dropped off. Is there any other government officials on the line who would like to comment? I know we have Fatima Kasoma from the Ministry of Finance from Angola. I don't know if you would like to comment from your experience in Angola.
Sorry, Paul, we have one hand up.
Okay, who's that?
It's from Hutsi Micheli.
Okay,
yeah,
please go ahead.
Thank you very much, and thank you for organizing this this webinar. I think it's quite informative, and of course, it's good to also share experiences from other jurisdictions. My name is Hutsi Michelia. I'm from Nigeria. I'm coordinating the UNDP NDC support program. And thank you, Mr. Afolabi from the Ministry of Finance, and for the work you're doing, particularly in trying to mainstream gender into the budget. But as part of the work that we've done, and the UNDP supported us in developing a mainstreaming toolkit on how we can mainstream the NDC, the Sendai framework, and the SDG into the National Economic Development Plan. And that toolkit had been developed, and we're trying to see how we can actually fully engage the Ministry of Finance and National Planning in terms of adopting it for the midterm economic development plan that is being developed. I send you a chart, and it would be nice if you can afford this opportunity to have some kind of meeting so that we can align what we're doing with what the Ministry of Finance and National Planning is doing, so that we can all have a very good budgeting tracking for all the activities under the 3 frameworks. Thank you very much.
Thanks for that. I think that's more an invitation. Fola, do you want to respond quickly, if it's okay to put you on the spot? And maybe you could also respond. I mean, you've heard from the other speakers about the role of media, civil society, and parliament. You've highlighted. Maybe you could respond to how that's working in Nigeria and how civil society and the media can support the Ministry of Finance around climate and gender issues.
Thank you so much, Paul, and thank you, Uzi. Definitely we'll be in touch after now to discuss areas of collaboration. So I'd like to say that for civil societies, what we rather want to see is increased collaboration. You know, the civil society organizations, they have a critical role to play in influencing policies, influencing legislation, and influencing implementation. Currently, the experience has been that civil society organizations are far and wide in between. They are stretched, and the impact can hardly be felt, you know, in the way the operation is currently carried on. So my recommendation would be for civil society organizations to collaborate more amongst themselves, and then to have more inter-institutional collaborations too. So rather than thinning out, it will be very helpful if civil society organizations focus on climate financing issues, will come together to concentrate efforts on achieving specific objectives. Take, for example, in policy formulation, or possibly in sponsoring legislation, or in monitoring implementation. You know, there are just so many areas, you know, of climate budgeting that civil society organizations could have tremendous impact if they are properly organized. I also think that civil society organizations also have the privilege of being very close to the local people. As you and I know, climate change issues are local in effect. You know, local people have a way of relating more when they are properly sensitized and educated, and when the implications of some of these developments are brought home to them. So I would like to see improved sensitization by civil society organizations, so that the people will be involved and actively engaged in the process, you know, of adapting to climate change issues, and of insisting on results as far as climate financing policy implementation is concerned. Also, I think, as I earlier mentioned, citizens' participation is easiest accomplished by civil society organizations for obvious reasons. They have very close, they have networks that are very, you know, amenable to working, you know, very fluidly with different strata of society. So civil society organizations should engage more in sensitizing people, sensitizing local communities, you know, on issues of climate financing, gender budgeting, gender responsive budgeting, so that when ideas are collated and when positions are presented, it will be fairly representative of what the minds of the local people for whom the policies are meant for in the first place, you know, will be. And finally, I'd like to say that with respect to implementation, bits and pieces, you know, of climate finance activities, budgeting, financing that currently goes on, most of which are hardly monitored, you know, by civil society organizations. It will be very important that civil society organizations hold state actors, to account and improve the open, the transparency in the system, the openness of the process to ensure that we get more value for every cost outlay in capital budgeting, especially as relates to fixing climate change issues. Thank you.
Great, that's a really useful set of recommendations from the Ministry of Finance perspective in Nigeria. I'll just see if there are any more comments or questions from the audience. Please raise your hand. Yeah, and then I'll hand over to anyone on the panel who wants to respond. But is there anyone from the audience who'd like to engage?
There's one hand up, Paul, from
yeah, I see.
Emmanuel.
Sure, yes, Emmanuel. I can see you'd like to respond to the interesting suggestions from Fola. So please go ahead from the civil society perspective in Ghana.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yes, in Ghana, relative to what we hear from Nigeria, there's that very close engagement with government in terms of the civil society engagement with government when we come to general issues, but specifically issues of budget advocacy. Because when you're talking about GRB issues, it falls in line with budget advocacy. Indeed, before the budget is prepared every year, the Ministry of Finance and the various sector ministries, in this wise, the Ministry of Environment closely would request for input from civil society. And then when the budget is read, we do analysis of it. We share with them for certain gaps that are in there. So let me say that indeed, civil society, we facilitate mobilization and also that coordinated engagement with government on climate change issues and issues in general. What we've done is that we have what's called the Ghana Civil Society Platform on SDGs, which is organized along the goals. So we have a convener and we have a sub-platform on climate action, that is the Go 13. And so Go 13 members, all civil society actors in that work together, of course, to make certain propositions to government. So that is done. What we've not been very good at possibly is what we are discussing now, actually focusing on issues of gender responsive budgeting in climate finance issues. And I believe that from this meeting, it's something that we really want to take it up and then see how we can also influence that space. Thank you.
Great, thank you. So that's a very concrete commitment to follow up from Ghana to try and look at this intersection between gender responsive budgeting and climate issues. Any other comments or questions, particularly from participants from the floor who haven't spoken in plenary yet? Anyone else? Okay, well, maybe I'd like to turn to the panelists to give their last reflections. So Josephine, would you like to respond to what you've heard from the different panelists and the comment from the floor? Over to you for just 1 minute, please.
Thank you, Paul. I think for me, my comment is around whose voice counts when we're setting priorities. And the answer to that is going to be very evident in the plans and in the actions that follow. I think that's something that's very important. My last comment is that we all know that there are spaces that civil society will access within government, and there are spaces that are closed that civil society will not access. So I guess there's a question there that needs to be asked in terms of how does civil society influence some of these closed spaces? Because we do know that financing or money is political, right? And especially at if we're looking at climate finance, if we're looking at allocations, implementations, and the decisions there, those are they are political. So how can civil society influence closed government spaces where critical decisions are being made?
Great, thanks, Josephine. Fidele, are you online? Do you want to make a final comment for 1 minute, please? Fidele, are you online with us? Do you want to make your comment? Okay, let's move on to Emmanuel. Over to you for the final comment from your side.
Okay, thank you. Just to quickly repeat that we, as civil society in Ghana, we want to be focusing on the issue of the climate change financing, and in particular, looking at gender responsive budgeting in that area. We've done some work on climate change financing, but not really focusing on GRB. The challenge, however, sometimes is getting some finance information from the government actors. But of course, we'll look at how we can leverage on some of the things that we've been doing together. So that is kind of a commitment for us to be more active in GRB, focusing on climate financing. Thank you.
Great, thanks. Fola, over to you for your final 1 minute on your perspective from Nigeria and possible future next steps.
Thank you so much again, Paul and the audience. I just like to emphasize again the importance of collaboration. You know, collaboration both within government actors, within civil society organizations, and then inter-institutional collaboration. This will be very key in driving the goal of ensuring a climate responsive, gender responsive budget. As we all know, the budget is one of the most significant piece of legislation, you know, in any economy. So it's important that we put forces together and ensure that the primary objective of ensuring that we formulate and implement policies, legislations that will make us have a more habitable planet is very critical. And the role of every actor is well spelled out, but it's critical that we collaborate more and look more on each other to ensure that the right things are done. Thank you very much.
Okay, just before we just have a few minutes left, I see that Hamilton Tembe, who I think is from the Ministry of Finance in Mozambique, has put a comment. Hamilton, would you like to speak in Portuguese and introduce your question and comment, please? Hamilton, are you able to unmute your mic and speak, please? Or could someone, okay, one new message. Oh, translation. Good morning, everyone. First, congratulate. In Mozambique, issues related to gender and climate change are seen as cross-cutting issues. That is, they go beyond the dimension of a single sector. All sectors have included these actions in planning, budgeting, monitoring, and evaluation process. With the existence of Ida and Kenneth cyclones in recent years, the government of Mozambique has created a post-cyclone reconstruction office that has been working towards providing direct assistance to the affected regions relying on the state budget and funding them from various partners, although it needs more support. So that indicates that the government is having to respond in Mozambique to these very dramatic climate-related disasters. And he's got technical difficulties, so is unable to speak. But thank you for that interjection from Mozambique that adds to the discussion. So we have 1 more minute left, and I'd like to turn to Gerald as our journalist on the panel, because we all know that what we read in the papers or see on TV or see on social media is what often drives policy. So Gerald, over to you for your final reflections in terms of what you've heard in the debate so far, please.
Thank you, Paul. As part of the conclusion, I would like to say that the media is a marketplace of ideas. And when you speak to the media, you speak to so many people. And now media extends beyond the traditional media. We have social media platforms that are in everyone's hands. But the media has different challenges. So we need frequently engage them to learn, relearn, keep on packaging and repackaging this story, telling the same story, but differently with a lot of mileage. We need to empower media in Africa. Media in Africa is different from elsewhere. We have unique challenges. So that development actors, including civil society organizations, you need to work more, engage more, and empower media so that we can get very good results. But above all, whatever activity we are doing, we are influencing audiences and publics in there. And we need communication strategies that can help us to hit the targets we want to hit. So for whatever activity we are going to engage, especially even financing, gender issues, we need communication strategies that will outline our strengths, at the same time also observe the weaknesses where they are so that we can reach the target with our good information which we have. Thank you so much. I'll stop there.
Great. So thank you very much for these very diverse perspectives from different stakeholders engaged in this important area of the link between climate, gender, and budgeting. So we'll thank the panelists and the audience for your active engagement, and over to Shanaz for the breakout groups.
Great. Thank you so much, Paul, and to all the panelists for an incredibly interesting session on the interaction between ministries of finance and oversight actors. Very important insights shared there from Nigeria, Kenya, Ghana, Uganda, and Madagascar. And I particularly appreciated the emphasis placed on gender considerations. So thank you very much. We are now moving to the next session, which are breakaway working groups. It will work in the same way it worked yesterday, in that our technical team will all move you to the relevant session based on the language preferences you indicated in the registration form. So session 6A will be in French, 6B in Portuguese, 6C and 6D in English. If by any chance you find yourself in a breakaway session that is not your language preference, please do let us know and we will try our best to put you into the correct room. Also to note that session 6D will have interpretation. So if we can now just start that process. Thank you, Flo. I'd love to welcome everyone back from the breakaway groups. Thank you so very much to all the session facilitators. And I hope that everyone had the opportunity to share some of the experiences you've had and thoughts on strengthening climate accountability and transparency. So I'd love to take the opportunity to just thank you all for participating in the event over the last 2 days. And I do welcome and encourage you all to attend our workshop tomorrow on gender and climate change in program design and appraisal. where we will get the opportunity to gain more insights from the work that was piloted in Benin. And that starts from 10 a.m. Pretoria Harare time, and it's a virtual event over Zoom. But for now, let me introduce our Executive Secretary, Neil Cole, to give us the closing remarks. Thank you. Neil, over to you.
Thank you very much, Shanaz. I mean, it was a really interesting 2 days that we've been together. Just as a recap, about 16 countries participated, including 2 new countries to the work we've been doing on climate change, being Angola and Botswana. I mean, although we've been doing these dialogues where we bring together not only policy makers on both sides, the sector side and the finance side, but also where we bring together government officials with civil society organizations and other international organizations such as the United Nations and others. This event, nonetheless, was still unique, and maybe unique in the sense that the spread of institutions and individuals was a lot wider than normally. And if one is going to be tackling, the issue of accountability, especially climate accountability and transparency, then you do need to be dialoguing with a much wider audience. So while this work across the 3 components which we spoke about has progressed, we've also heard over the past 2 days of some of the challenges that still exist. And this includes difficulty navigating the work in still a relatively nascent field, without clear guidance on some key aspects. But I suppose we all feel somewhat like trailblazers, and certainly, CABRI feels often most comfortable when it is in a position of being a trailblazer in tackling the myriad of challenges in Africa. And this is not only in terms of the topic being tackled, but also in the approach that we use, and also the approach that our partners use. And that is often keeps us in that area of capacity building and peer learning on the continent, and peer learning being one of the central pillars of the work of CABRI and our partners. So, if I speak on behalf of the team of CABRI, we certainly hope that during the second phase of the program, that we are calling the implementation phase, provided that we conclude certain negotiations with our technical and funding partners, we hope that we can continue then to support governments in implementing phase of this program. So just as a reminder, and Shanaz mentioned this, tomorrow we will have a workshop, which is a follow-on event to the peer learning exchange that happened in June. And remember that June event looked at the opportunities to coordinate the integration of gender and climate change into budgeting and finance. The event will detail the experience of Benin in piloting a method for the inclusion of gender and climate change in program design and appraisal in the energy and agricultural sector. So that's very important. We'll also look at our final event for this year as part of the IBF CCA program. And certainly therefore look forward to welcoming you all again tomorrow. So remember, we spoke about an inception phase and then an implementation phase. So tomorrow's event will be the final event of the inception phase. So it's quite important that you participate and also that we hear your inputs, which I'm sure will start to inform the implementation phase. Once again, let me thank the partners, as this is a joint event with IBP, IIED, and UNDP, and more especially also to CEDA for their contribution to the program and financial support. We also thank other partners who contributed to the program, the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, GIZ, and also the OECD, Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. And then last but never least, let me thank all the presenters, the session facilitators, all of you, the participants, and also our translators that make it possible for us to bring together countries across the African continent that do converse in different languages. The interpreters certainly make that possible. And then to the technical team from CABRI and also from our service provider that makes sure that everything works well on this virtual online platform. Thank you very much, Shanaz. Thank you very much to all of you. And if it was an in-person event, I would be saying Safari and Jema, bon voyage. But I'm sure many of you are sitting either in your office or in your home. And those that are not in your home, I'm sure you don't have too far to travel. Thank you very much.